My husband broke down the door to steal my inheritance, but he had no idea he was unlocking a 30-year-old nightmare hidden beneath the floorboards. The smell of stale lilies and expensive perfume still lingers in the entryway of the house I grew up in. My father was buried exactly 48 hours ago, and the silence in the hallways is heavy, almost suffocating. He was a man of routines. The whistling of the kettle at 6 a.m., the sound of his slippers on the hardwood, the rhythmic clicking of his typewriter from the study. Now there is nothing but the hum of the refrigerator and the sound of my own shallow breathing. My father didn't have much in the way of liquid assets, but he had this house. It's a sprawling Victorian on the edge of town, 3 stories of mahogany, stained glass, and memories. To me, it's a sanctuary. To my husband, Mark, and my mother-in-law, Eleanor, it has always been a lottery ticket. I was sitting in my father's old armchair, clutching a cold cup of tea, when the heavy front door rattled in its frame. It wasn't a gentle knock. It was the sound of someone who believed they didn't need permission to enter. I didn't get up. I couldn't. My bones felt like they were made of lead. The rattling intensified, followed by the jingle of keys I didn't realize Mark had duplicated. The door swung open, and the cold afternoon air rushed in, bringing with it the scent of Eleanor's aggressive floral perfume. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Clara, why are the lights off? It looks like a tomb in here." Eleanor's voice sliced through the stillness like a serrated blade. She didn't wait for an answer. She marched into the living room, her heels clicking sharply on the floors my father had hand-waxed every spring. Mark followed behind her, looking uncharacteristically sheepish, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. "Quote underscore 2 underscore," I said, my voice sounding thin and raspy. "Quote 3, Eleanor said, pulling off her leather gloves and tossing them onto the antique side table. "Quote 4. I felt a cold prickle of alarm. Quote 5. Mark finally stepped forward, rubbing the back of his neck. Quote 6. I stared at him, my heart hammering against my ribs. My father hadn't even been gone a week, and they were already mentally swinging sledgehammers. Resale. I'm living here, Mark. I moved my things back here to take care of Dad during his final months. I'm staying. This is my home. Eleanor let out a sharp, mocking laugh. Your home? Don't be sentimental, Clara. It's an asset. And as your husband's mother, I'm not going to sit by and watch you squander his inheritance on feelings. We've already drafted a plan. We move in on Monday to start the transition. I've already contacted the movers for your father's old junk. Junk? I stood up, the tea splashing onto my hand, but I didn't feel the burn. Quote 10. Mark's face hardened. The Quote 11 facade he'd worn for the 3 years of our marriage was beginning to crumble. Quote 12. Quote 13. I said, my voice shaking with a mix of fury and grief. Eleanor stepped toward me, her eyes narrowing. She'd always been a woman who got what she wanted through sheer intimidation. Quote 15. Quote 16, I said, moving faster than I thought I could. I stepped past them and grabbed the heavy brass handle of the front door, swinging it wide. Quote 17. Mark paused, looking at his mother for direction. Eleanor's face turned a mottled shade of red. Quote 18. Quote 19. I screamed, the sound echoing up the grand staircase. I managed to usher them out onto the porch, the sheer force of my anger catching them off guard. As soon as they stepped over the threshold, I slammed the door and turned the deadbolt. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely move the latch. I leaned my back against the wood, gasping for air, listening to Eleanor's muffled shrieks from the other side. Quote 20 she yelled. I didn't answer. I ran to the back door and the side entrance, checking every lock, every window. My heart was thumping in my ears. I felt like a hunted animal in my own sanctuary. I went to the window beside the front door and peered through the curtains. They weren't leaving. They were standing on the lawn, gesturing wildly. Mark looked frustrated, but Eleanor looked possessed. She was pointing at the house, her mouth moving a mile a minute. Then she turned to Mark and grabbed him by the shoulders, shaking him. I saw Mark shake his head at first, looking at the door with a trace of hesitation. But Eleanor leaned in, whispering something into his ear with such intensity that his expression shifted. The hesitation vanished, replaced by a cold, determined mask. He walked toward the heavy oak door, the door my father had hand-carved 40 years ago. He didn't reach for his keys this time. He braced his shoulder, his eyes fixed on the wood. I heard Eleanor's voice rise above the wind, shrill and commanding, stripped of any pretense of motherly concern. "Break the door down, son. This house is ours now." The first heavy thud against the wood vibrated through the entire frame, and I realized with a jolt of pure terror that the deadbolt wasn't going to hold for long. The first blow felt like a gunshot echoing through the foyer. The heavy oak door, which had stood firm against winter gales and decades of history, groaned under the weight of my husband's shoulder. I backed away, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. "Mark, stop!" I screamed, my voice cracking. "This is a crime. You can't just break in." "It's not breaking in if I'm your husband, Clara." His voice boomed from the other side, distorted by the thick wood but carrying a terrifying edge of entitlement. "I'm trying to help you. Open the damn door before I really lose my temper." Another thud. This time, I saw a hairline fracture appear in the center panel. My father had loved this door. He'd told me stories about how the wood was harvested from an old shipyard, seasoned by salt and thyme. Seeing it splinter felt like watching someone desecrate his corpse. I scrambled toward the kitchen, my mind racing. My phone? Where was my phone? I'd left it on the charging dock in the study. I bolted toward the back of the house, the sound of Mark's rhythmic assaults on the front entrance following me like a countdown. "That's it, son. Put your back into it." Eleanor's voice rose above the chaos, shrill and gleeful. "She's just being dramatic. She'll thank us when she sees the renovation plans. This house is a gold mine, and she's treating it like a museum for a dead man." I reached the study and lunged for my phone. My fingers were shaking so violently I nearly knocked it off the desk. I swiped the screen, ready to dial 911, but the display remained black. Dead. The charger wasn't plugged into the wall. I looked down and saw the cord had been sliced, neatly, intentionally. A cold realization washed over me. They hadn't just arrived today. They had been here while I was at the funeral parlor yesterday finalizing the arrangements. They had keys. They had access. They had prepared for this. Crack. The sound of wood finally giving way was followed by the heavy tumble of the hall tree I'd used to barricade the door. I heard the deadbolt snap, the metal screeching as it was forced from the frame. The front door swung inward with a violent bang against the interior wall. "Clara, sweetie, don't hide," Eleanor sang out. Her voice was terrifyingly calm now, the tone she used when she was pretending to be the concerned matriarch in front of guests. "We just want to talk. We're family. Family doesn't call the police on each other." I ducked behind my father's massive mahogany desk, pulling my knees to my chest. The study was at the end of a long hallway, and I could hear their footsteps, Mark's heavy, purposeful stride and Eleanor's sharp, rhythmic clicking. "She's in here," Mark said, his voice closer now. He sounded winded, his breath coming in ragged gasps. I saw the light on in the study. The door to the study creaked open. I held my breath, pressing my hand over my mouth to stifle a sob. I could see their shadows stretching across the Persian rug. "Clara, come out from behind there," Mark said. He sounded annoyed, like he was talking to a disobedient child. "You're making a scene. Mom and I have been talking to a lawyer. Since we've been married for 3 years and I've been contributing to our joint expenses, I have a legal claim to your assets. This house isn't just yours. It's marital property." "It's not," I yelled, finally standing up, my anger momentarily overriding my fear. I gripped the edge of the desk for support. This house was an inheritance. In this state, inheritances aren't marital property unless they're commingled. "I never put your name on the deed, Mark. I never used our joint savings for the taxes. This is mine." Eleanor stepped into the room, her eyes scanning the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves with a greedy glint. She ran a finger over a first-edition volume, leaving a trail in the light dust. "Oh, Clara, you're so naive. You think a few legal technicalities are going to stop us? Your father was a hoarder. Look at this place. It's a fire hazard. We've already filed a petition for a wellness check on you. We'll tell them you're grieving, unstable, and unable to care for yourself or this property." "You're insane," I whispered. "No, dear. We're practical," Eleanor snapped. She turned to Mark. "Start in the attic. I want all the old paperwork, everything. If there's a second will or a life insurance policy we missed, find it. I'll handle her." Mark nodded and turned to leave, but I stepped forward to stop him. He shoved me back, not hard enough to hurt, but enough to show me he could. He looked at me with a stranger's eyes. This wasn't the man I'd married. This was Eleanor's son, finally showing the rot that lived beneath the surface. "Stay in here with Mom, Clara," he said coldly. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." He left, his footsteps thumping up the stairs toward the 3rd floor. I was left alone with Eleanor. She sat down in my father's leather chair, the one that still smelled of his pipe tobacco, and crossed her legs comfortably. "You know," she said, smoothing her skirt, "your father wasn't as smart as you think he was. He was struggling. Those last few months, the medical bills, he came to us, Clara. He was desperate." "He would never go to you for money," I said, my voice trembling. "He hated the way you treated me." "He didn't have a choice," Eleanor smiled, reaching into her designer handbag. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and slid it across the desk toward me. "He signed this 4 months ago. It's a private loan agreement. He put this house up as collateral. If the debt wasn't settled within 90 days of his passing, the title transfers to me." My heart stopped. I picked up the paper, my eyes blurring as I tried to read the jagged scrawl at the bottom. It looked like my father's signature, but it was shaky, almost illegible, like it had been forced or forged while he was heavily medicated. "This isn't real," I choked out. "He would have told me." He was ashamed, Clara. "Men like him don't like admitting they've failed," she said, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. "So you see, the door breaking was just a formality. I already own the ground you're standing on. Now be a good girl and tell me where he kept the key to the floor safe. We know it's in this room." I stared at her, the paper fluttering in my hand. My father had mentioned a safe once, years ago, but he'd said it was only for _quote_23_. I thought he was being poetic. Before I could respond, a muffled crash echoed from the floor above, followed by a shout from Mark. "Mom, you need to see this! I found it!" Eleanor stood up so fast her chair tipped over. She didn't look at me again as she sprinted out of the room. I followed her, my instinct for self-preservation warring with a desperate need to know what they'd found. I reached the attic stairs just as Mark was pulling a heavy, rusted metal box out from behind a false panel in the eaves. It wasn't the floor safe. It was something else. Mark pried the lid open with a crowbar. Inside wasn't money or a will. It was a stack of old yellowed photographs and a series of police reports from 30 years ago. Reports with Eleanor's name, highlighted in red. Eleanor's face went from triumphant to deathly pale in a split second. She lunged for the box, but Mark held it back, his brow furrowing as he read the top page. "Mom?" Mark's voice was small, confused. "What is this? Why does it say you were a suspect in a disappearance?" Eleanor didn't answer him. She turned her gaze to me, and for the first time I didn't see greed in her eyes. I saw a cold, murderous panic. "Give me that box, Mark," she whispered, her voice like a snake's hiss. "Give it to me right now, or neither of you is leaving this house." The air in the attic was thick with dust and the sudden, freezing realization that I didn't know the people standing in front of me at all. Mark's hands were shaking so hard the yellowed papers rattled like dry leaves. Eleanor stood frozen at the top of the stairs, the shadows of the rafters cutting across her face like bars of a cage. "Mark, put that down." Eleanor said, her voice dropping an octave. It wasn't a request. It was the sound of a predator marking its territory. Those are old lies, malicious gossip from people who were jealous of our family's standing. Gossip? Mark's voice was high, cracked with disbelief. He held up a grainy black and white photo of a young woman with wide, startled eyes. This is a police intake photo. Mom, and this report. It says you were the last person seen with Julianne Thorne before she disappeared in 1994. It says there was blood found in the trunk of your car. My blood turned to ice. Julianne Thorne. I remembered that name. My father used to keep a single dried rose in the back of his desk drawer, tucked inside a small envelope labeled JT. He told me once it was for a friend he'd lost a long time ago. I'd assumed he meant to cancer or a tragic accident. I never realized he meant he'd lost her to the woman now trying to steal his house. It was a misunderstanding. Eleanor stepped forward, her heels clicking dangerously on the unfinished wooden planks. The case was dropped. There was no evidence. Your father, he was obsessed with her. He spent 30 years trying to pin it on me because he couldn't accept that she simply ran away from him. Then why did he have this? I stepped toward Mark, my eyes locked on the box. Why would he keep a police file hidden in a false wall if the case was closed? He was protecting himself, wasn't he? He knew what you were capable of, and he kept this as insurance. The truth was laid bare in the dim light of the attic. My father hadn't been, quote, 24 or, quote, 25. He had been a man living in the shadow of a monster, holding on to the only weapon he had to keep Eleanor at bay. And the moment he died, she had come to reclaim the evidence. The quote 26, the quote 27, the quote 28. It was all a smokescreen to get inside this house and find this rusted metal box. Eleanor's mask didn't just slip, it shattered. The refined, haughty woman disappeared, replaced by something jagged and frantic. She lunged toward Mark, her fingers clawing at the box. Give it to me. You have no idea what I did to build this life for you, Mark. Everything I've done, every sacrifice, was for your future. Mark stumbled back, tripping over a stack of old trunks. The box flew from his hands, the contents spilling across the floor. Photos, handwritten notes, and a small tarnished silver locket skittered across the wood. I dove for the locket. My fingers closed around the cold metal just as Eleanor's hand slammed down inches from mine. I scrambled back, clutching the jewelry to my chest. "Mark, help me!" I cried out. But my husband was paralyzed, staring at his mother as if seeing her for the first time. "Mark, don't just stand there," Eleanor hissed, spinning around to face her son. "She has the locket. If she takes that to the authorities, everything we've worked for is gone. Your career, our reputation, this house, it all vanishes. Do you want to spend the rest of your life as the son of a murderer?" "A murderer?" Mark whispered, his face pale. "So it's true? You actually did it?" Eleanor didn't answer. Her silence was more damning than any confession. She turned back to me, her eyes fixed on the locket in my hand. She reached behind her, her hand fumbling on a nearby workbench until it closed around a heavy, rusted iron, an antique my father had kept for his collection. "The loan agreement," I said, my voice trembling as I backed toward the narrow attic stairs. "The signature on that paper. You forged it, didn't you? You didn't just come here for the house. You came here to finish what you started 30 years ago." "I'm taking what belongs to me," Eleanor said, her voice eerily calm as she began to circle me. "This house, the secret, and that locket. You're just a temporary obstacle, Clara, a girl who thinks she can play in the big leagues because her daddy left her some old wood and stained glass." "Mark, do something," I pleaded. Mark looked at me, then at the iron in his mother's hand. For a second, I saw a flash of the man I'd loved, the man who had promised to protect me. But then, Eleanor spoke again, her voice low and manipulative. "Think about the debt, Mark. Think about the lifestyle you want. If she wins, we lose everything. We'll be in the streets, Is she really worth your entire future? I saw the shift in Mark's eyes. The greed that Eleanor had spent a lifetime cultivating in him began to drown out his conscience. He didn't move to stop her. He stepped back, clearing the way. "Give her the locket, Clara," Mark said, his voice flat and dead. "Just give it to her, and maybe we can talk about this." "Talk about it?" I backed toward the stairs, but Eleanor was faster. She blocked the exit, the heavy iron held high. "There's no more talking," she said. I turned, looking for any other way out, but the attic was a dead end. Small. Decorative windows were too narrow to crawl through. My heart was thundering in my throat. I squeezed the locket in my hand, the sharp edges digging into my palm. Suddenly, the locket clicked open. Inside wasn't a photo. It was a tiny folded piece of vellum paper and a small, intricately carved key, different from the ones to the house. I remembered what Eleanor had said earlier about the floor safe in the study. "We know it's in this room. She didn't have the key. She'd been looking for it, and I was holding it." Eleanor saw the key in my palm and let out a guttural scream of rage. She swung the iron, the heavy metal whistling through the air. I ducked, the weapon smashing into a wooden support beam with a force that would have crushed my skull. I used the momentum to shove past her, bolting for the stairs. I scrambled down the narrow, creaking steps, my boots slipping on the wood. I could hear them right behind me, Mark's heavy footsteps and Eleanor's frantic breathing. I hit the second-floor landing and didn't stop, flying down the grand staircase toward the study. If I could get to the safe, if I could lock myself in. I burst into the study and slammed the door, throwing the deadbolt. A second later, the wood shuddered as Mark threw himself against it. "Clara! Open the door!" I ignored him. I dove for the center of the room, ripping back the heavy Persian rug. There, flush with the floorboards, was a steel plate with a single, tiny keyhole. My hands were sweating, making the small key slick. I fumbled with the lock, hearing the door frame groan under Mark's weight. Behind him, Eleanor was shrieking, break it down now!" The key turned. Click. I lifted the heavy steel lid just as the study door splintered open. I reached into the dark cavity of the safe, expecting to find more papers or perhaps money. Instead, my hand brushed against something cold, damp, and unmistakably organic. I pulled my hand back, a scream dying in my throat, as I looked down into the safe and realized why my father had never moved the rug. There was a muffled, rhythmic thumping coming from inside the wall behind the safe, and as the study door finally gave way, a voice, hollow, raspy, and barely human, whispered from the shadows behind the bookshelf, Is she gone yet?" The whisper was so thin, so fragile, that for a heartbeat, I thought it was the wind whistling through the cracks of this old, dying house. But the words were unmistakable. Is she gone yet?" I froze, my hand still hovering over the dark void of the floor safe. The cold, damp, organic thing I had touched wasn't a corpse. It was a hand, a living, shivering hand that had retreated into the darkness the moment my fingers brushed it. Before I could scream, the study door exploded inward. The wood splintered with a deafening crack as Mark's shoulder finally won the battle against the lock. He stumbled into the room, chest heaving, his face a mask of sweat and desperation. Behind him, Eleanor loomed like a shadow, the heavy antique iron still gripped in her white-knuckled hand. "Get away from there!" Eleanor shrieked, her voice hitting a frequency that made the glass in the bookshelves vibrate. I scrambled backward, away from the open safe, my eyes darting between the two monsters in front of me and the dark hole in the floor. "There's someone in there," I gasped, my voice barely a whistle. "Mark, there's someone under the floor!" Mark stopped, his gaze dropping to the open steel plate. His eyes widened, but he didn't look surprised. He looked terrified. He looked at his mother, a silent, pleading question in his eyes. "Don't listen to her, Mark," Eleanor hissed, stepping into the center of the room. She didn't even look at the safe. Her eyes were fixed on the locket and the key I still held in my left hand. She's hallucinating. The stress has finally broken her. We need to get her out of here now. I'm not hallucinating, I yelled, backing into the heavy mahogany bookshelf. I felt a hand and a voice. Someone whispered to me, "Is she gone?" The voice came again, louder this time, drifting up from the safe. It was the voice of a woman who hadn't used her vocal cords in years, hollow, rattling, and filled with a profound, soul-deep exhaustion. Mark went pale, his knees buckling slightly. "Mom? What is that?" Eleanor's face underwent a terrifying transformation. The panic I'd seen in the attic vanished, replaced by a cold, clinical hardness. She didn't look like a greedy mother-in-law anymore. She looked like an executioner. "It's a ghost, Mark," she said, her voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "A ghost your father kept in a cage because he was too weak to do what needed to be done. And now, Clara has let the ghost out." She turned her gaze to me, and for the first time in my life, I saw true, unadulterated evil. You just couldn't leave it alone, could you? You had to dig. You had to look behind the curtain. I felt the bookshelf behind me shift. It wasn't just a heavy piece of furniture. I heard a mechanical click, the sound of ancient counterweights moving behind the wood. The shelf began to slide open, revealing a narrow, pitch-black seam in the wall. The smell that wafted out was overwhelming. The scent of damp earth, old paper, and something sickly sweet like rotting lilies. "Clara, move!" Mark suddenly shouted, lunging toward me. I didn't know if he was trying to grab me or save me, but I didn't wait to find out. I threw the locket at Eleanor's head, a desperate distraction, and bolted toward the shifting bookshelf. I squeezed into the narrowing gap just as Eleanor's iron smashed into the wood where my head had been a second before. I was in a lightless crawl space. The floor was cold stone, and the air was thick with dust. I could hear the bookshelf thud shut behind me, plunging me into total darkness. "Clara!" Mark's voice was muffled by the wood. "Open it! You don't know what's back there." "Kill the lights, Mark," I heard Eleanor scream from the study. "Don't let her see the way out." I scrambled through the dark, my hands scraping against rough-hewn stone walls. This wasn't part of the house's original architecture. This was something built later, a secret artery running through the Victorian skeleton. I felt a draft of cold air and followed it, my heart hammering so loud I was sure they could hear it through the walls. I turned a corner and saw a faint, flickering light ahead, the glow of a single, low-wattage bulb. The crawlspace opened into a small, hidden room. It was tucked between the study and the kitchen, a space that didn't exist on any blueprints. There was a cot, a small table covered in stacks of yellowed newspapers, and a bucket of water. And there, sitting on the edge of the cot, was a woman. She was skeletal, her skin the color of parchment, her hair a long, matted shroud of white. She was wearing a dress that might have been blue 30 years ago, now faded to a ghostly gray. In her lap, she held a photograph, the same photo Mark had found in the attic. The photo of Julianne Thorne. She looked up at me, her eyes clouded with cataracts but burning with a frantic, desperate intelligence. "You have his eyes," she whispered. "Arthur's daughter." "Julianne?" I breathed, the name feeling like a sin in the air. "You've been here all this time? My father? He kept you here?" "He kept me alive," she corrected, her voice cracking. "She wanted me dead. She tried to kill me in the woods, but Arthur found me. He couldn't go to the police. She had the judge in her pocket back then. She would have finished the job, so he hid me. He built this place to keep me safe from her." A sudden, violent thud shook the wall behind us, the sound of a sledgehammer hitting the lath and plaster. "She knows," Julianne cried out, cowering back against the stones. "She knows I'm still here. She's coming to finish it." "I won't let her," I said, though I had no weapon, no phone, and no way out. "There is a way," Julianne said, reaching under the cot and pulling out a heavy, leather-bound ledger. Arthur kept records. Every payment she made to the hitman she hired, every threat, every cent she stole from your family to buy the silence of the town. It's all here. He told me to give it to you if he didn't come back." The wall groaned. A crack appeared in the plaster, and a sliver of light from the study broke through. I saw the tip of the iron crowbar pry into the gap. "Give it to me, Clara." Eleanor's voice was a distorted howl. "Give me the book and I'll let you live. I'll let you both go." "Don't believe her," Julianne whispered, clutching my arm. Her grip was surprisingly strong, her fingernails digging into my skin. "She can't let us go, not now." I grabbed the ledger, the weight of it a physical burden. I looked around the tiny room. There were no other doors, no windows. We were trapped. The floor. Julianne pointed to a small wooden hatch near the safe's interior opening. "The old coal chute. It leads to the cellar. Go." I helped the frail woman toward the hatch, but she shook her head, pushing me toward it. "I'm too weak. I'll only slow you down. Take the book. Run." "I'm not leaving you." The wall gave way. A massive section of the bookshelf and plaster collapsed into the hidden room in a cloud of white dust. Mark stepped through the opening, his eyes wide with horror as he saw the woman on the cot. But it was Eleanor who followed him, her face twisted into a mask of pure, murderous triumph. She didn't look at me. She looked at Julianne. 30 years, Eleanor whispered, raising a small, sleek pistol I hadn't seen before. 30 years of looking over my shoulder, wondering if Arthur finally grew a spine. All that time you were right under my feet. "Mark, stop her," I screamed. Mark looked at the gun, then at the skeletal woman, then at me. He took a step toward his mother, his hand reaching out. "Mom, put the gun down. We have the house. We have the money. We don't need to do this." Eleanor didn't even blink. She turned the gun toward her own son. "Don't be a fool, Mark. There are no witnesses to a house fire." She pulled a small lighter from her pocket and tossed it onto the stack of dry, yellowed newspapers on the table. The flame caught instantly, a roar of orange hunger climbing the walls. "Now," Eleanor said, her finger tightening on the trigger as the smoke began to fill the tiny, windowless room. "Give me the ledger, Clara, or I start with Mark." But before I could move, a heavy metallic clack echoed from beneath our feet, not from the coal chute, but from the very foundations of the house. The floor beneath Eleanor began to tilt, the ancient wooden beams shrieking in protest. "What is that?" Mark yelled, grabbing onto a support post. Julianne Thorne leaned forward, a terrifying, toothless smile spreading across her face. "Arthur always said, if she ever found the room, the house would take her with it." As the floor gave way, I saw a flash of something in the darkness below. Not a cellar, but a deep, brick-lined well that shouldn't have been there. And then, the light from the fire revealed something even more terrifying. The well wasn't empty. The well wasn't a well at all. It was the house's original cistern, a massive, brick-lined cavern designed to hold thousands of gallons of rainwater. But as the firelight danced over the edge, I saw what my father had hidden there. It was the rusted, skeletal frame of a 1990s sedan. The car Eleanor had supposedly sold decades ago, the car the police had been looking for. My father hadn't just hidden the victim. He had hidden the crime scene itself, right beneath the feet of the woman who thought she'd gotten away with it. The floor groaned again, a sound like a giant beast dying. Eleanor screamed, her designer heels sliding on the slick, soot-covered wood. She reached out, her fingers clawing at the air, but the gun slipped from her hand, clattering into the dark depths of the cistern. "Mark, help me!" she shrieked. Mark was frozen. He looked at the fire climbing the walls, then at the skeletal woman on the cot, then at the pit where his mother was dangling. The greed that had driven him for years was suddenly met with the cold, hard reality of what that greed had been built upon. "The ledger, Clara!" Julianne gasped, her voice stronger now, fueled by the sight of her tormentor's ruin. "Don't let it burn." I clutched the heavy book to my chest. The heat was becoming unbearable. The smoke was thick and black, stinging my eyes and lungs. I grabbed Julianne's arm, pulling her toward the coal chute. She was light as a feather, her bones feeling like dry kindling. "Mark, we have to go," I yelled. But Mark wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the ledger in my arms. Even now, with the world collapsing, he saw the dollar signs. He saw the leverage. "Give me the book, Clara," he said, his voice eerily calm amidst the roar of the flames. "If I have that, I can fix this. I can make sure we're taken care of. Mom is done for, but we don't have to be." I looked at my husband, the man I had shared a bed with, the man I thought I knew, and felt a wave of revulsion more intense than the heat of the fire. "You're just like her," I whispered. I didn't give him the book. I turned and shoved Julianne into the coal chute. It was a steep, metal-lined slide that led to the exterior of the house. She vanished into the darkness with a sharp intake of breath. "Clara!" Mark lunged for me. At that exact moment, the main support beam in the study gave way. The floor didn't just tilt, it disintegrated. Eleanor let out one final, high-pitched wail as the section of floor she was clinging to vanished into the cistern. She fell into the darkness, landing with a sickening crunch against the rusted roof of the car, the very evidence of her sins. Mark screamed as the floor beneath him vanished, too. He managed to grab the edge of the brick cistern wall, his legs dangling over the abyss where his mother lay silent. "Clara, help me, please." I stood at the edge of the chute, the ledger clutched to my chest. I looked at him. I saw the fear in his eyes, but I also saw the calculation. He wasn't sorry for what they'd done. He was sorry he was losing. "The house is yours now, Mark," I said, quoting his mother's words back to him. "Just like you wanted." I didn't wait to see if he could pull himself up. I dove into the coal chute, the cold metal a shock against my skin as I tumbled down the narrow tunnel. I hit the leaf-strewn ground outside with a thud, gasping for air that didn't taste like ash. Julianne was there, huddled in the shadows of the bushes, staring up at the house. The Victorian was a pillar of fire. The stained glass windows were exploding outward, sending shards of colored light into the night sky like demonic confetti. It was beautiful and horrific all at once. The sanctuary my father had built was becoming a funeral pyre. I pulled Julianne away from the heat, dragging her toward the tree line just as the sirens began to wail in the distance. The fire department couldn't save the house. It was too old, the wood too dry, the fire too hungry. By the time the sun began to peek over the horizon, my childhood home was nothing but a blackened skeleton, a smoking ruin of brick and charred timber. The authorities found Eleanor's body in the cistern, pinned inside the rusted car she had tried to erase from history. Mark had survived the fall into the pit, but the smoke inhalation and the trauma had left him a shell of a man. He didn't fight when the police found him. He didn't fight when they found the ledger I handed over, the ledger that detailed 30 years of Eleanor's systemic bribery, extortion, and the attempted murder of Julianne Thorne. The _32_Eleanor had used to try and steal the house was quickly proven to be a forgery, but it didn't matter. There was no house left to steal. Months later, I sat on a bench in a quiet park overlooking the town. Beside me sat Julianne. She looked different now, cleaner, her hair cut short, her eyes clear. She would never fully recover from the decades of isolation, but she was free. My father had left a secret trust fund in her name, hidden in a bank account Eleanor never knew existed. It was enough to provide for her for the rest of her life. "He loved you, you know," Julianne said, her voice still raspy but steady. "Arthur. He hated what he had to do to keep me safe. He hated the lies, but he knew if Eleanor found out I was alive, she would kill us both. He was waiting for her to die first. He just ran out of time." I nodded, looking down at the small silver locket in my hand. The key to the safe was gone, lost in the ruins, but the locket remained. "He didn't run out of time," I said softly. "He just passed the torch." The lawyers told me that even though the house was gone, the land was worth a fortune. Developers were already calling, wanting to build condos or a shopping center on the site of the old Victorian. I declined every offer. I went back to the property one last time. The scorched earth was already beginning to show signs of life, small green shoots of grass and wildflowers pushing through the soot. I walked to the spot where the study used to be, where the cistern had been filled in with concrete and earth. I buried the locket there. Mark is serving 20 years for his role in the conspiracy and the assault. Eleanor's name is a curse in this town now, a reminder of the rot that can hide behind a polite smile and an expensive suit. As for me, I realized that my father didn't leave me a house. He left me the truth. And the truth doesn't need a roof or walls to stand. I turned away from the ruins and walked toward my car, where Julianne was waiting. We had a long drive ahead of us, a new city, a new life, and for the first time in 30 years, no secrets to hide. The house was gone, but for the first time in my life, I was finally home. Image prompts. 1. A hyper-realistic cinematic shot of a determined man in a modern suit, using a heavy sledgehammer to break open a hand-carved, antique Victorian oak door. Splinters of wood fly toward the camera, and the dark hallway inside reveals a glimpse of a dusty, ancient floor with glowing light coming from beneath the boards. 2. A suspenseful close-up of a woman's hand pulling back a heavy, blood-stained Persian rug in a dimly lit library. Beneath the rug, a secret metal hatch is partially open, and a pale, skeletal hand is seen reaching out from the pitch-black void below. Realistic textures and dramatic shadows. 3. A cinematic wide shot of a grand Victorian study engulfed in orange flames. In the center of the room, the floor has collapsed, revealing a hidden, brick-lined cistern below, where the rusted roof of a 1990s car is visible. An elegant but frantic older woman stands at the edge, illuminated by firelight. 4. A realistic, chilling image of an elegant older woman with a twisted expression, holding a heavy, rusted antique iron like a weapon. She is standing in a narrow, secret crawl space behind a bookshelf, with dust motes dancing in a single beam of light and old police files scattered at her feet. 5. A dramatic YouTube thumbnail-style shot showing a woman with a flashlight peering into a dark hole in the floorboards. The beam of light hits an old, tarnished silver locket and a dusty ledger. The background shows a blurry silhouette of a man approaching her menacingly in a burning room.